we were looking for truth. And when you look around, there are a whole number of definitions of truth. If you take each of them, it'll make your head reel. What I did was look at it historically. Historically, there are three concepts of truth. Number one, traditional. Traditional truth is that which is like a fortress, like a moat, big walls, stone walls, a moat around it, and a drawbridge, and only a privileged few who can get inside there. And who are these few? The clergy. They can get inside there and then come out and tell us poor commoners what is inside there and how those mysterious pages apply to us. Traditional truth. Next is modern or scientific truth. A few hundred years old, scientific truth says, why should the clergy alone have the right to tell us what is truth? We'll look for truth ourselves. And they formulated what is known as the scientific method. You make an observation, and from that observation, a hypothesis or a theory, and then you want to test the theory, you design an experiment, and implement that experiment, gather the data, analyze the data, and the conclusion of that analysis is truth. Everything else is suspect. That is modern truth. Over the last about 40 years, the next form has just swept over all the earth. It's called postmodernism or relativism. There are some other big words, subjectivism or deconstructionism. Well, I'm not trying to impress you with those words. They are just there. It simply means this: all truth are only relatively true. All statements. Well, actually to observation, it really seems reasonable to start off with. Which side of the table is this pointer? Left or right? Well, it depends on where you are standing. If I'm standing on this side, then this side is left and that side is right. If I'm standing on that side of the table, then the same left side becomes right and the right side becomes left. So your next question is, well, which is this side of the table and which is that side of the table? If you're standing on this side, then this side is this side and that side is that side. But if you're standing on that side, then this side is that side and that side is this side. Yes, it really is true. And so we say, well, everything that we talk about is just that way. There is no such thing as an absolute truth in the sense that it will form a reference point. You can tether the rest of your statements or your activities to that point. No, there's no such thing. This is what they say. So when I looked at these three, I first looked at the traditional truth and I was horrified. Dismal picture: corruption, treachery, torture, murder, crusades like the crusade jihads, inquisitions. Religion has a checkered history and some of it is reprehensible. I said, woo, who wants that kind of a stuff? Let me go to modern truth. It's a good process because they look for what they call facts, evidence. And some of those facts, they do their mathematical calculations to the 5th and 6th decimal points. Very impressive, but completely out of its depth in the face of what I was searching. Essence of life, death, religion, God. In fact, it denies the existence of God. As a philosophy, science says there is nothing supernatural. So I was stuck with that. It's not going to help me. I went on to postmodern truth or relativism. It's very broad and peaceful. You have yours, I have mine. I scratch your back, you scratch mine. And we'll get along okay. But when it came to absolute truth, it made an uncompromising stand. There is no such thing as anything known as absolute truth. Everything is only relative. So what is absolute truth? Now we're not talking about absolute in the sense of all knowledge. We are talking about that which can form a reference point in our existence. So absolute truth for us must be defined before we carry on. And here's a definition I found, and I think it is quite reasonable. What is absolute truth? That which is valid for all people, in all places, at all times. So in our existence, that will be called an absolute truth. And relativism says there is no such thing as absolute truth. Because this is what they say. There is no objective standard by which truth may be determined, so that truth varies with individuals and circumstances. Or, there is only one principle that can be defended under all circumstances and in all stages of human development. It is the principle, anything goes. I'd like you to remember that phrase, anything goes. Anything goes is also everything goes, correct? Are you with me? Yeah. Everything goes is the same as everything is acceptable. All right, so we're going to look at that in a few moments. All so-called truth is only relatively true. There is no such thing as absolute truth. If there was no such thing, then my search would end right there, because I would say, you go your way, I go mine, and we are all friends, and that's it. But I had to establish that. I could not just swallow it, and so I examined it. I have written a book by the same title as this seminar. It's called Come Search With Me. We might make it available. It's not yet available here. It's available in the United States. But in that book, I went through 12 to 14 angles in which I looked at it. I'm going to show you only 3. So let's examine it. Number 1, remember that phrase, everything goes? That means everything is acceptable. Everything is acceptable. What is the meaning of everything? Everything. All that you can think of. Anything that's within our sphere of existence. Any concept, any claim, any principle should be acceptable if you are going to say everything goes or everything is acceptable. Then if everything is acceptable, then absolute truth also should be acceptable. And once you have one absolute truth, out goes relativism. No fixed meaning. Remember, right or left? I don't know. This side or that side? Who knows? That depends on something else. So there is no fixed meaning in any of the words. Up might be down, down might be up. Let's form a sentence with that. There is no fixed meaning in this word. There is no fixed meaning in this word. Do you know something? That sentence requires a fixed meaning to tell me what it's saying. Yes, it does. It requires a fixed meaning. There itself you see that it is a self-defeating proposition. The third one is an illustration. It's an illustration of two people talking. Now, relativism says that all statements are only relatively true. Now you answer me. If all statements are only relatively true, they are also relatively false. Now where are we going to go? Here's a conversation between two individuals who are trying to decide whether man did really go to the moon. Yes, they went to the moon. Of course they did not. I saw it on TV. Hey, it could be relatively true or relatively false. It could be a studio stunt. No, it was on the headlines. Hey, the headlines could be true or false. No, my teacher said that the headlines were okay. Well, your teacher could be stating that which is relatively true or relatively false. Now, my dad said my teacher was reliable. Well, your dad may be saying that which is true, or he may be saying that which is false. Hey, I know my dad. Well, you might know your dad, but you might not know your dad. I know what's in my mind. Oh, you might know what's in your mind, but you might not know what's in your mind. I'm talking about myself. You might be talking about yourself, or you might be talking about somebody else. Look, quit. Please quit. this silly, nonsensical talk. Okay, I'll quit. But that does not mean I'll quit. And we kind of smile. It's an illustration. But I would like you to observe one thing during this conversation. The first question was, did man go to the moon? Did he really step onto the moon? And every subsequent question and a response was taking one step further and further away from the original question. By the time you went to the third level, you had no hope of ever coming back to the first. In other words, if relativism is the norm, which itself is an oxymoron, then you can only have questions in your existence. You can never have answers. Are you with me? You should never go to school because your professor or teacher may be bluffing you wholesale. And if he really is referring to a book, well, the author of the book may be doing the same thing. You can't even buy grocery. You don't know what's inside there. You know, some of you look at those labels on the bottles, you know, how much of this and how much of that. How do you know that's all there inside there? You're not supposed to buy anything. If relativism is the norm, we are stuck. Where are you going to meet me? In other words, another illustration. If I tell you, let's meet 150 feet to the left of the Boeing 747. And we say, the next question, where is the Boeing 747? It left 2 hours ago from Brisbane on its way to Los Angeles. Now where are we going to meet? Relativism is just that practical. We have to recognize that if there is a reference point, we can be practical, we can live practically. If it is only relativism, you follow it to its end, which is an oxymoron itself, because relativism cannot have an end. But if you follow it to its end, you are stuck with no way to take the next step in your life. So it's called infinite regression, going backwards. So it looks like any apparent suggestion of relativism is either self-defeating or else is not a real assertion but something more like an empty slogan. This is precisely what I believe postmodernism best represents: only a mood, not even a philosophy. To say it's true that nothing is true is intrinsically meaningless nonsense. The very statement there is no absolute truth is an absolute truth, because you are making an all-encompassing statement. The medieval heritage, well. So right at this point, I was in an intellectual bind. I had turned my face away from traditional truth. Modern truth was not going to help me in my search. And I had realized relativism was not going to lead me anywhere. It would just bind my feet and make me stand where I am. But how do you make decisions? You can't throw off everything. And so I re-evaluated what I had done, realizing somewhere I had made a mistake. You can't throw off everything of truth. It'll be the same as non-existence. And when I went back, I found one thing that I had done was unfair as far as traditional truth was concerned. When I went to modern truth, which is scientific truth, I had evaluated their claims, looked at what they were saying and grappled with what they were trying to say, the principles they were trying to put forward. When I went to postmodernism, I did the same thing. What are they saying? Let's weigh it back and forth. But if you remember, what I had done with traditional truth, I had thrown it off because of bad behavior. Jihads, papal inquisitions, crusades. That's behavior. I had not looked at what they were trying to say. And the reason is, of course there's bad behavior. Who doesn't know that? One of the worst words right now I come across is the word religion. Oh boy, it really rankles people up. In fact, one of the questions was, don't you think religion has spoiled the whole earth? Yeah. When you look at what we put on the board a few little minutes ago, yes. But remember, there's something more than that. And that's what I came across. Yes, religion can be very rigid and make you very proud and oppressive. But I also found some people who were extraordinarily generous, self-sacrificing, pleasant, just beautiful people. And when I asked them, what's the secret? You are so loved in this whole community. What is your secret? Religion. So here was religion causing beautiful people to grow up and nasty people as well. Now, how many of us have seen families in which one grows up to be a graceful member of the society and the other becomes a scumbag? Sometimes they are twins who go completely opposite ways. So shall we look at only the scumbag and just discredit the whole family? That won't be fair at all. And therefore, when I saw that there were two things that traditional truth was offering and portraying to me, I said, well, let's look at the substance, like I had looked at the substance of modern truth and postmodern truth. That's what I did. And about this time, I read this statement from Carl Henry. The medieval heritage is not nearly as discredited as its current critiques would have us believe. So what is this thing called medieval heritage? It is the traditional truth as found in the sacred written codes or literature of antiquity. The word antiquity just means ancient. That which has come down to us. The medieval heritage is not as discredited as some of the critics would have us believe, because there is a lot of criticism about what has come down, and we accept that. But let's look to see if it is really discredited, or is there some substance to what they are saying hundreds and thousands of years ago. So literature of antiquity, that's what I went for. Oh boy. Now what do? I have only one lifetime. And that won't be enough to do even 2 or 3 of these. I felt I had hit a stone wall. Multiple lifetimes wouldn't be enough to really study them all. I sat down to think, how shall I proceed? Well, I started asking like before. I started asking people, hey, do you know that big long list of claims out there? What do you think about them? And to the next, and to the next. And as I talked to people about this big long list, and this is only a partial list, it's a bitty part of the list. There's a huge long list after that. There were 2 concepts that came out. One was, oh yeah, I know that big list, but don't bother about the big list. There's only one way, mine. The other side, the other concept, yes, I've seen the big list. It's impressive, but don't be too bothered about it, because all of them finally reach the same destination. The first one is called exclusivism, exclusively one, mine. The second one is called pluralism, all. It's plural, more than one. All of them will finally lead you to the same final destination. Don't be bothered. I had to look at pluralism first, because if that was sustained, I don't have to search anymore, because I was already believing something and I can stay right there. I don't have to scratch my head. No running into some nebulous field trying to figure out what's happening out there. I would be satisfied, and you would be satisfied where you are. So, that's what pluralism said. All religions lead to God. They are different paths but end up at the same destination. For instance, God is in the world, but Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad are in their little closets, and we should thank them but never return to them. To understand God is to listen. Listen to Jesus and Muhammad and Buddha, but don't get caught up in the names. Listen beyond them. Listen to God's breath. That's a Zen saying. Sounds very impressive, actually. Sounds quite captivating too. I would like you to remember two phrases on the screen here. Listen to and listen beyond. And we'll come back to those phrases. So pluralism recognizes not only the existence of other religions, but their intrinsic equal values. They have to say that. They have to say that they are all equal, because if they don't, I will say which is the best. Or you will have to say which is the best. So when pluralism says all the paths lead to the same goal, they have to state that all of them are equally valid and equally true. There is no option they have but to state it that way. So child sacrifice and voodooism and witchcraft is the same as the peaceful Buddhism and Hinduism. Yeah, you have to say it. They are not only valid and true, but equally so. And the destination is the same. Where did they get the idea from? Did the religious writings say so? And so I went to the religious writings, and I'm going to put up statements from the 5 religious writings that we are going to study during this seminar. Hinduism. It's in the Bhagavad Gita, which is the kernel or core of Hindu thought. And here it is talking about Krishna. He is recognized by the flute and a dark kin. This is what Krishna says. I am the goal, the upholder, the master, the witness, the home, the shelter, and the most dear friend. I am the creation and the annihilation, the basis of everything. The resting place and eternal seed. Let there be one scripture for the whole world, the Bhagavad Gita. Let there be one God for the whole world, Sri Krishna, and one hymn, one mantra, one prayer, the chanting of his name. That's the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, page 33. When it comes to Islam, in the 2nd chapter and verse 255, it is called the regal or the coronation verse of the Quran. This is what it says. Allah, there is no God but He, the living, the self-subsisting supporter of all. His are, how much? All things in the heavens and on earth. His throne doth extend over the earth. He is the Most High, the Supreme. Buddhism. From the Buddhist scripture, this is what is talking about Gautama Buddha. This Lord is truly the Arhat. Arhat is a person who has reached the ultimate stage of attainment. Fully enlightened, perfect in his knowledge and conduct, well gone, world knower. What's the next word? Unsurpassed. Leader of men to be tamed, teacher of gods and men, the Buddha, the Lord. Judaism, from the writings of the prophets. For thus said the Lord who created the heavens, who is God, who formed the earth. I am the Lord, and there are about 20 others. There is no others. Are you seeing something? One more. Christianity. There is how many other names? No other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved. Do you know something? When I read the scriptures, the writings that came down to us from ages past, I do not find a single religion which ever says, I am the path and the others are an equal alternative. Not a single one. Not only do they say that I am the only way, they point to the others and say they are not. Look at these sentences and statements. In Buddhism, the Buddha held that this belief in a permanent self or soul is one of the most deceitful delusions ever held by man. What he is talking about is the Hindu central concept of an eternal soul. And with one sentence, he has wiped out the basis of Hinduism, calling it the most deceitful delusion ever held by man. Judaism, understand that I am He. Before me there was no God formed, nor shall there be after me. One statement, and every other claimant, antecedent and precedent is wiped off. All whoever came before me are thieves and robbers. That's from Christianity. But the sheep did not hear them. Those to whom the burden of Torah, this is now writing from the Quran, the Muslims, those to whom the burden of Torah was entrusted and yet refused to bear it are like a donkey laden with books. Wretched is the example of those who deny God's revelations. Quran 62, second chapter and verse 5. Who is this verse talking about? The Jews and the Christians. Because the Torah was revealed to them. Knock them off. I have not found one single religion accommodating any sympathy for any other. So don't point to just one of them and say, hey, that's bigoted. No, all of them are. If you want to use the word bigoted, I wouldn't use the word bigoted because we are searching. I would just say that's their claim. Each religion claims to be the champion. Nobody says, I will share my gold medal with the others. Donkey, wretched, thieves, robbers, deceitful, these are the words that I use. So how can pluralism now claim that all are equally true? Can you have a deceitful truth? No. Can you find something that's wretched as well as good? And if we understand what they mean by donkey, can you have a valid donkey? No, you can't. Pluralism can say that all of them are bad. But pluralism has no basis of saying all of them are valid. Are you with me? Because in the writings, I do not find that at all. So, the written codes clearly claim exclusivity. Each religion claims to be the only way. So I wanted to scrutinize that. Equality. Remember they said that all will be equal? Now the word equal, by its own meaning, inherent within it, means that there is a reference point. If I and you say that we are equal weight, then we have stepped on the same weighing machine, right? Not even a different weighing machine. We've got to the same weighing machine, and then when we stand there and check it out, okay, I'm this many pounds or kilos, and you check it out, you're this many kilos. Now we can say we're equal weight. Alas, there is no universally acceptable reference point for religion. There simply is not. There is no basis for saying they're equal. Out goes that claim. You have to establish yourself. That was my search. Establish what is being stated, and I will accept it. If you cannot establish it, then let's put it to a side. It might still be correct, but it does not occupy central focus. The Zen saying, you remember the Zen saying said, listen to Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, but don't get caught up in the names. Listen beyond them. Listen to God's breath. And I asked you to remember those two phrases, listen to, listen beyond. The Zen saying was asking us to listen to them as well as listen beyond them. Have you tried it? I tried it. And when I listened to them, I could not listen beyond them because they were telling me not to go beyond them. When I went to listen to Muhammad, he said, you dare not go beyond me to anybody else but Allah. When I asked the Christians, Jesus, he said, hey, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Any other path is destruction. You cannot listen to them and beyond them. You choose one or the other. The Zen saying has no basis. The third is the character of God. In my book, I went through about 12 points, and I'm showing you only 3. The character of this generic God that formulated all these religions on earth. What is his character if he really did such a lot of diverse religions popping up every now and then on earth? Let's just take one example, maybe 2, maybe 3, of religions. Hindus, okay, you're Hindus, you are Muslims, you're Christians. And this God goes to the Hindus and says, look, I'm going to tell you the truth. Don't you ever believe anybody who says there's only one God. Plenty of them. Gods, demigods, semi-gods, deities, all kinds of supernatural beings. And then he turns around to the Muslims Hey, have you heard those guys ever talking about there being many? It's all dead wrong. There's only one God, Allah, and only one final prophet, Muhammad. Don't you ever believe them? In fact, why don't you go and tell them that they are wrong? Then he goes to these people. Well, by the way, we said these people, the Hindus, have many gods. Anybody know what the guesstimated number of the deities there are in the peninsula that I come from? 330 million. I didn't hear a wow. Okay. Christians. 330 million? One. I'm going to give you a tricky one. Not 330 million, not one, 3 in 1. Now go figure. Well, we might think it is kind of funny, smile. No. Look at the human history. The worst, the most cruel wars ever fought on the face of this planet was because of these differences. So my question is, what was he doing, throwing out these things and watching, having fun, watching the wars? I did not want that kind of a God. I still don't. If a person can just throw out and at some point, either here or here or here or to the others, this God obviously told a lie. I'm sorry. The pluralistic, generic God has somewhere not been truthful. And that is why when I looked at pluralism, it did not stand scrutiny of neither of the written codes nor of plain common sense based on the written codes. At the heart of every religion is an uncompromising commitment to a particular way of defining who God is or is not, and accordingly of defining life's purpose. Every religion at its core is exclusive. What is truly arrogant is the postmodernist pluralism which in vain pursuit of a superficial tolerance negotiates away the ultimate commitment by which any religion lives. And the ultimate commitment is, I am the only way. Agreement cannot be made without substantial compromise of core beliefs. I tried that, and some people many times tell me, why can't we just pick out some from each of them and form one generic religion? Something that is kind of common to all. You could. But if you do that, the first thing you will have to go and tell the founder, like Muhammad, I'm sorry Muhammad, you're wrong. You're not the only way. And you have to have some backing to say that. I did not have any backing to say that. I could not go to Muhammad or Buddha or Jesus and tell them, hey buddy, look, I'm smarter than you, you're wrong, I'm right. I could not do that. I had no position, I had no supernatural knowledge, I had no authority. I was stuck, accepting only what they said. And the other thing is, if you really do it, you will decimate each religion beyond recognition in trying to do that. Try it and see. You will have to knock it down completely, throw up its bases, and then try to bring them together. And by that time you will have another religion which somebody else will tell you, tell me whether that is the way, and you'll have to put it in the same category as all the others and still evaluate all of them. You have gone nowhere in trying to form a generic religion. Every religion claims itself to be the only way. So, are we out of the woods? No. Because there's more than one who is saying, I am the only way. So if we have 3 or 4 claimants to be the champion, what are the options? Number 1, all are correct, which is absolutely absurd. Unreasonable, we can't go that way. You cannot have 2 or 3 and 5 prime ministers. That's not possible. So you can't have more than one final champion. All are wrong. That's a possibility. That is not absurd. That is not illogical. But there were two things that stopped me from saying that. Number one, to call anything wrong, I must know what is right. It doesn't work the other way around. You must first know what is right, and then you can call something else wrong. I didn't have anything in my hands to say that this is right. So I had no basis of calling any of them wrong. And I would have to call all of them wrong with this option. Number two is, if I really did that, one common claim that all these religions were making was that there was something known as the supernatural. All of them were saying that. And if I really have to wipe them off, I'll have to wipe off the concept of the supernatural along with them, and that was what we had first established yesterday. It was there. I could not run away from it. Because of these two reasons, I could not accept that they were all wrong. I had no authority to say that they were wrong. So that left me with only one option. I struggled with this for 6 months, and I'm going to throw it out to you as a suggestion. Look at that, and if you find any other option apart from these three, by all means come up to me and tell me. I'm still searching on that point. But until somebody shows me, there is only one option left, and that is that there is only one that is legitimately saying that I am the only way. There is only one that is legitimate in that claim, that is making a truthful claim. This is sheer reasoning and logic. Think about it, and if you think there's another way, please, I would still accept if there's an opinion that you have. Until such time, that's it. And that is what we're going to pursue. So when that came to me, it became a crucial, pivotal conclusion that there's one and only one religion that can make a legitimate claim of being the only way. Boy, it was frightening. There's one and only one way. It was really frightening because when you come to that conclusion, you yourself are studying and you are faced with that, your first question really is, am I in that way or am I out? It's frightening. And I remember my children going to my wife and saying, is dad losing his mind during the search? It was a compliment because they were really scared because I was really searching. If I was artificially searching, they wouldn't be scared at all. So, when I came to that point, I had to evaluate what they were saying again. There's one and only one way. So what is the significance of this? The significance are many. I've just jotted down these 6. Number one, it's a conclusion reached by a neutral person like you and me. Remember yesterday we stepped out of our philosophies. So we were like a person on the street. And we were neutral. We had no axe to grind. And from our neutral point of view, we came to the conclusion that there is just one way. We don't know which one it is. We have not established it at all, and we may never establish in our lifetime. But that still remains that there is only one way. Number two is it destroys the concept of pluralism completely. Pluralism will not stand. Number three, it has a strong application to followers. So if you are out there, if you are a Hindu, you have no business saying that the other religions are equally valid as yours. Because you will have to deny your own writing. If you're a Muslim, you have no business saying pluralism is correct. Because you would have to deny Muhammad and Allah before you say that. If you're a Christian, same thing. You cannot say that you can bring them together in the pluralistic form before first denying and showing that Jesus and his claims are wrong. Number four, it's a fundamental claim. What's the meaning of fundamental? Foundational. What happens if the foundation is thrown off? The superstructure falls. It's like this. If you are a witness in a murder trial and you make a very detailed statement about that murder, You were there, as it were. You saw the murder weapon. You saw the clothes. You saw the facial expressions. You saw the blood spattered out. You saw everything, the cries for help. And you make a fantastic, detailed explanation and description of that scene. And then the defense counsel gets up and asks you, where were you the night it happened? And he shows you a video clip that you were at that point in time in Amsterdam duty-free shopping while the murder took place here at Byron Bay. What happens to all that detailed description? Gone. Not a single sentence will stand. Because being present is fundamental to being a witness. Similarly, if you say you are the only way, it is such a fundamental claim that if you are not the only way, you are no way at all. And I'm saying it not because we want to put down the others. I mustn't say no way at all. I must say you will be the way only if you agree in your tenets along with the champion. If you agree at any point with the champion, you're okay. If you disagree with the champion, then those points are out. Because you are not the reference point. It is a fundamental claim to say, I am the only way. Number 5. It's the most powerful motivating claim. And here's the illustration. Suppose you had gone to work in a high-rise building, 40th floor. That's where your office is. And then you just look out the window in the morning, and the 30th floor is on fire. And the fire, of course, comes up. And so it's coming up. You think of the stairs. You think of the elevator. No way out. It's coming out to 35th, 36th floor now. And you realize, hopeless case. You want to jump out, but 40th floor. If you jump out, it's sure death. And so as the heat comes up, you realize that this is going to be the end. You crouch down in the lowest part of your office, probably get a towel from somewhere and, give it some moisture from the tap and put it over your nose, hoping that those acrid fumes will not come into your system. And just when you give up all hope, you call in your mind your spouse, your children, your loved ones and say goodbye. This is the end. The heat you can just feel. Just when you're thinking that, a fireman bursts into the room, kicks the door open and he says, anybody here, follow me down this stairs, it is the only way out. What will you do? Let me first decide whether I will follow you. No. It is the most powerful motivating claim from that fireman to say, this stairway is the only way out. And that is what every founder of every religion said. This is the only path out. They didn't want us to go to university and get A's and B's and C's on a test. They wanted us to pull up our bootstraps and go the way they were telling you to go. None of them wanted anything else. Number 6, it'll dictate the type of search we will now do. See if there is just one way, then how far ahead should he be, or she be, or that religion be? How far ahead is the 100 meters Olympic champion ahead by? 0.001 second sometimes, and only he is champion, nobody else. You don't have to be so far ahead. That's one thing. Number 2 is, if there is just one, then when you look at 4 or 5, the concept of one will dictate to you right away which one it might be. For example, we are looking for the correct colored marble. the correct colored marble. There are 5 green marbles and only 1 red marble. So which one is the correct colored marble? If we say there's only one, red. Because we've already decided there's only one. If we're trying to decide which is the correct way to compete in this event. Everybody is running and this guy is walking. Which is the correct way to compete? If there's only one way to compete, walking. Well, sometimes it's shiny and red, but let's look at another example. There are 4 shiny, beautiful red marbles and a stinky, dirty brown one. Which one is the correct one? The stinky, dirty brown one. Because the concept is there's just one. So what we look for then is any claim that is just going off by itself and not sticking with the rest. It might be up in front, maybe way at the back. Doesn't matter. Are you with me? Okay. If any questions, you can write down your questions on the card and raise your hand if you do have one. With this concept, I went to 5 major religions, and I chose these because these religions made the claim very clear, unequivocal, that they were the only way. Hinduism, the founder is not Viswamitra. I've just put down one of the authors of there. There are many, many authors. There's no one single founder. For example, the literature is the Rig Veda, Upanishad, the Bhagavad Gita, which is in the Mahabharata. Islam, Muhammad is the founder. The Quran is the literature. Buddhism, Buddha, Buddhist writings. Christianity, Jesus and the Bible. Judaism, Moses and the law and the prophets. And if you look at today, the study of the Torah, which is called the Talmud, also is a part of the literature. Before I went to look at them, I realized that some of them were making big claims, impressive claims, saying that this is unique to their religion. But when I looked at another religion, they also made similar claims. It no longer was unique. Unique means just one. So I had to put those claims aside because they would not help me find the one way. And there were 12 such factors: a complete message, faith and trust, picture of a Savior God, incarnation, one supreme being, it is revealed and not man-made, it's beyond logic and reason, realization, experience are essential keys, the goal is incredibly fantastic, blessings even in this present life, it is universal, not just for the adherents of that faith, and number 12, presence of miracles. These are found in more than one. So I put all these 12 aside and looked at 10 questions. 3 questions I addressed to the writings. Number 1, what type of writing is it? Is it mythological? Is it legendary? Is it a folk tale? Or is it historical? Number 2, does it throw out a challenge for itself to be tested in any form? Or does it say, it can't be tested, take it, swallow it, or throw it out? Don't try to test it at all. Number 3 is, can anyone describe a top feature of the writing? Those are the 3 questions I addressed to the writings. The 7 questions after that were to the founders. What is the highest claim you make for yourself? What is your message and mission in a nutshell? And the 3rd question to the founders was, to me, a real acid test, a real test. Did your life match your own teachings as a founder? Number 4, what happened around birth time? Number 5, how long was your ministry? How long did you take to make a statement to the world? And number 6, to the founders, what was the circumstances at death? And final question, what happened after you died? So these 10 questions we will ask, all the 5, pull out the responses from their writings or from a source that is friendly to that religion. That is the criteria. I did not go to a critique of the religion to pull out anything. And then I would not be able to state whether they are telling the truth or not. I could not. All I would do is ask the question, pull out the answer and just lay it side by side and see what happens. When I started this, like any other person, you don't know what the outcome would be at that point. You don't know whether there will be any outcome. Maybe it's all some fuzzy, nebulous conclusion, which you can't even call a conclusion. Here it is. The first one, classification of literature. Ancient literature is classified into folktale, legend, myth, or historical. A folktale, there is no attempt to state a real, true story. The main intent is to be interesting and bring out a lesson or a moral. So it's very common that a folktale or folklore, you will have birds talking together, and the sun smiling, they're all personified, and the breeze whispering, and all the animals having a big committee meeting. They are not interested in telling you a real story. A folktale, the story part, can be anything. When it comes to a legend, it's probably based on a real true story, but this is the key for a legend. Changes will creep in, exaggerations and embellishments to superhuman proportions, and the changes begin generations after the event when there are no longer any witnesses to challenge that change. That is the key of a legend. It is not possible to create a legend in the generation or two of the event, because there are people around who will say, no, that didn't happen. It's wrong. In fact, if you read some of the descriptions, and we talk about 1 or 2 generations, the description of Gautama Buddha and some medallions that were carved out in memory of him, a 300-year-old medallion is called by historians fresh in the memory of the people. So we're talking about centuries. Time period to create a legend requires centuries, usually. Myth is so far back in history that is generally accepted as somebody's imagination. The story is probably not true. The characters are probably fictitious. It usually involves the supernatural world. And the time period for the myth is usually many centuries and even thousands of years. Historical, the attempt is to state the story as it really was. There are no significant additions, no core changes. Remember, all ancient writings have changes. There is not a single ancient writing in which there is no changes at all. The question is, are there core changes that changes the intent of the story? That is what in a historical writing is really not so much in play. The closer to the event, the greater the credibility. Why did I go for this factor first? It is because of the credibility of the message. I am not saying that a mythological message is wrong. I am saying that a mythological message attached to a myth has less credibility than a historical piece of literature which is attached to a message. Because, for instance, a legend, if the story changed, I cannot vouch that the teachings also did not change. So it is not fixed, but it's just the level of credibility. Now with these words, let's look at the writings themselves. Hinduism. The Rig Veda is the earliest text, followed by the next 3 Veda texts, and then an anthology which is known as the Upanishads, and then an epic or a big story which is called the Ramayana, the story of Rama and Sita, and then the Mahabharata, in which is found the Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavad Gita is the baby of their literature, the youngest one. Here's what they're saying. Lord Krishna first spoke Bhagavad Gita to the sun god some hundreds of millions of years ago. Now there's no way any of us can go back hundreds of millions of years to establish anything of that nature. But they do say it was lost to humanity and then came back again in what circumstances is called the Battle of Kurukshetra, which is the northern part of India, and that was 50 centuries ago. Still a long ways away. Difficult to go back. And that is why some of the encyclopedias do call it a mythological story, although it's not wrong. I'm not saying it's wrong. All I'm saying is that it has a mythological flavor. Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu, the preserver of the universe, according to Hindu mythology. Most scholars agree that those stories are mythological. Doesn't make the teachings wrong. Again, it just questions whether there's any change in the teachings or whether they were original. Number two is Buddhism. There are 4 statements I'm going to make, and they are chronological in terms of time. The first statement is the humanity of the Buddha was expressed by a Theravada monk. A Theravada were the people, all the teachings, contemporary with Gautama Buddha. So when a contemporary monk spoke, he was talking about what he knew about Gautama Buddha personally. He said, was he not born at Lumbini? Did he not complete existence and Kusinara? In other words, he was just like you and me. He was born here, died here. But number 2, soon after the passing of the master, a change began to set in. At the beginning of the Christian era, that's now 500 years have gone by, the transcendental nature of the Buddha became more and more pronounced. Number 4, in one of the most important pieces of Mahayana literature, now Mahayana is the next form of Buddhism, which came about 700 to 1,000 years later. And in that, there is not much of the man left in the Buddha. He is now an exalted being who has lived for countless ages in the past and will continue to live forever. And that is why historians, when they write the story of Gautama Buddha, whose name was Siddhartha, they usually agree that it is difficult to establish that everything that we talk about him today, whether it is really the original story. And they do put this idea of a legend. Again, it's not wrong. Always saying, if the legend shows that there were changes, then I don't know whether the teachings also changed. Judaism, there are 39 books in what is called the Old Testament. 20 different authors living at vastly different periods of history. Some writings appear mythological, while others are accurately historical. Now, this is my own opinion. And so, I could not classify, because 39 books, how do you make one classification? So I left it unclassified. If any of you are able to classify those into any one type in these 4, you can go ahead and come up to me and tell me, and it'll be a part of my presentations after that. Islam, the Quran was put together in writing by 652 CE. CE is Common Era, the same as AD. Within 30 years of Muhammad's life, only some changes in the text are accepted by scholars. I'm being very liberal here, because actually in the reign of one of the caliphs, whose name was Uthman, Ali, the next caliph, had said that Uthman was dealing with a Quran that was corrupted. So Uthman immediately said, no, that won't be right. And so he called the scholars together and said, get the authentic Quran. Go around and find out which is really what Muhammad said and did. And so they did that and brought together what we have today as the present Quran. But unfortunately, they wiped off every other manuscript. So we don't know whether what we have today. So I'm just being liberal. But at the same time, we recognize it in the same lifetime. Hard to form a legend in the same lifetime. When it comes to Christianity, the earliest manuscript is about 114 to 134 AD. It's in England, kept in the John Rylands Library. The original manuscripts, the copies, were within 20 to 50 years of the life of Jesus. Do you know which are the earliest writings of the New Testament? They're not the Gospels. They're the letters of Paul. And the way he has described certain events, when we look back at the history by Luke, who wrote that and put that together, some of those writings were within 15 years of the life of Jesus. Now, Paul got his ideas not by himself originally. The story part he got from the disciples of Jesus. So obviously the story had been gelled even before that. In other words, for this literature, there's practically no gap between the actual story and the gelling of the story that took place, which we have today in the New Testament. It's confined to one generation, there are no core changes. We can already say emphatically there is no longer any solid basis for dating any book of the New Testament after AD 80. That's Sir William Albright. He is acknowledged as one of the greatest archaeologists in the world. Now, what I did was, we acknowledge and accept books today in libraries of the universities as historical writings. Nobody questions them at all. For instance, Caesar's Gallic Wars or Gallic Wars. But look when it was written, 100 BC it was written, and the earliest manuscript we have of that event is dated 1900 AD. There's a gap of 1,000 years in which we don't know what was in the writing. And still we accept it clearly as historical. Nobody questions it. Same with Herodotus' history. It was written in 400 BC. Earliest manuscript we have in our hands is 900 AD. A gap of 1,300 years. And still we accept it as historical. Tacitus' Annals, 1,000 years is the gap. When it comes to the New Testament, I compared that because that was looking like in front. The New Testament, the gap is only 20 to 50 years, and in fact less than that. In one attribute, in one concept, we really cannot call the New Testament as mythological or legendary. It was just too early. If we can swallow 1,000 years, we should be fair enough to grant 20 years to 50 years. The second concept of credibility to a writing, to say that it might be historical in which the changes did not really occur in a major way, is the number of manuscripts. If there are a few manuscripts in the same town, for instance, then a person can go to each of them and change it at a place, and nobody will know it's changed, and we've changed the manuscript. It's corrupted. If there are many, many manuscripts, it's hard to go to all of them and make the same changes. The people will know that it's being changed, and they'll get back and say, wait a minute. Something is happening here, let's purify it. So the greater the number of manuscripts, the more difficult to make the changes. And if those number of manuscripts are saying about the same thing, it is hard, difficult to challenge the mainstream story of that writing. Let's compare that now. Caesar's Gallic Wars is based on 10 manuscripts worldwide. Herodotus' history is based on 8 manuscripts worldwide. Tacitus' Annals is based on 20. The champion there among the Greek literatures is Homer's Iliad. Homer's Iliad is based on 643 manuscripts. Isn't that impressive compared to this? Yeah. So now suppose I tell you that the New Testament is based on 665, would you say wow? I'm not pushing you into any direction. I'm just going to throw out the real number that the scholars have actually counted. The New Testament is based on 5,664 Greek manuscripts. If you add the Latin and the Arabic and the rest of them, do you know the number? It is 24,900. Compare that with 10, which everybody says is a historical piece of writing. If you are going to say 10 and 20 and 600 allows you to say that it's historical, then I believe 5,000 should clearly classify this writing as a historical piece of writing. Now that does not mean you cannot challenge it. You can challenge it, but you cannot challenge it as a mythological writing and class it with all the other myths. No. You can challenge it much like, the present day challenge, even now going on, as to really how did John F. Kennedy die in Dallas in 1963? All kinds of stories, but they're all historical. They do clash, but nobody ever, because of that clash, calls JFK a mythological figure and a mythological story. So similarly, if we find something that we can't really swallow quickly in a historical piece of literature, then honesty and fairness demands that we don't throw it off like a mythological writing, but examine it. Are you with me? The facts And the evidences do not allow us to call the New Testament as a mythological or a legendary piece of writing. That's the main point. In real terms, the New Testament is easily the best attested ancient writing in terms of sheer number of documents, the time span between the events in the document, and the variety of documents available to sustain or contradict it. There is nothing in ancient manuscript evidence to match such textual availability and integrity. No other ancient book has anything like such early and plentiful testimony to its text, and no unbiased scholar would deny that the text that has come down to us is substantially sound. In the variety and fullness of the evidence on which it rests, the text of the New Testament stands absolutely and unapproachably alone among ancient prose writings. Not ancient religious prose writings, among all ancient prose writings. Indian, Chinese, Greek, Romans, all. Put them all together. The New Testament is the most backed scripture or writing in the world. And so, to be skeptical of the resultant text of the New Testament books is to allow all of classical antiquity to slip into obscurity, for no document of the ancient period are as well attested bibliographically as the New Testament. The Quran and the New Testament are definitely historical in nature, with the New Testament having a very high credibility and integrity of text. Now, I've heard lots of people saying, so many changes, how do we know? That is true. There are many changes. But look, if you're going to say there are many changes and so the credibility of this is in question, you will have to question every other ancient writing in the world today. And be fair about it. Are you with me? Okay? These are the evidences and the facts on which we can base a certain conclusion. You don't have to, but at least accept that these are not personal opinion, these are numbers. The challenge to test and see. Any questions? You can write them out. Challenge to test and see. Did that literature throw out a challenge and say, well, here I am, test me out? In Hinduism, we have to accept it as it is, otherwise there is no point in trying to understand the Bhagavad Gita and its speaker, Lord Krishna. The Hindu literature does not throw out a challenge to test. It just says, here it is, you can take it or you can leave it aside. Buddhism, the genuine realization of the emptiness of the phenomenon world is a direct intuition of the highest truth. Absolute truth is unconditional, undeterminate, and beyond thought and word. Once again, clearly stating that we are unable to actually grapple with it. We either take it or we leave it aside. You cannot test it by any means, except experience. And both these religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, say the test is the experience of it. For me, and that's my search, the question of why should I test this and not that? Give me a reason for testing. And if you don't give me a reason, then let me look at something, some other one that gives me a reason for testing. I'm not dismissing it. I'm just saying you put the cart before the horse if you say first test it out. And if you have to test it out, you have to get into the experience of it. And here are other religions telling me if you ever go and experience that one, you are out for the count. So give me a reason. So those two don't allow us to really test it except by personal experience. Islam does throw out a challenge. It says, produce one chapter comparable to it, the Quran. Call upon your idols to assist you if what you say is true. But if you fail, as you are sure to fail, in other words, the Quran writing is of such a nature that nobody else can equal it. And so the challenge is, can anybody produce writing that is comparable to it? There are 3 or 4 verses in the Quran which throw out a challenge. Produce a book, or produce a chapter, or even produce a verse that is comparable to the Quran. I took up the challenge and I said, okay, let me try to do what they are saying, because it's a challenge, and honestly, go and see if you can get it done. There were 4 snags that killed the attempt. Number 1, it would not say what aspect to be equaled. Whether it is the prose or the poetry or the truth or the doctrine or the concept of God what was it that I'm supposed to equal? It wouldn't say. Number two, what would be the method of comparison? Some kind of point system, or just a feeling that you have equaled it or not equaled it or surpassed it? There is no way that it gave us a method of comparison. So even if I wanted to do it, how will we come to a conclusion after I have done the test? Number three, who will be the judge that it has been done? Will it be some neutral committee from the United Nations? Or would it be a mullah in one of the mosques? Or a Muslim committee? Or just any other neutral committee? It does not say so, though by default, when you throw out a challenge, by default it goes to the individual. And so I would have to be the judge. And I honestly can say that I have read, if it is talking about the beauty of the Quran, because that is one of its top features, and we'll see that in the next section, then I honestly have read writing that I think I must say equals at least the beauty of the Quran. Because I don't know how beautiful it is. The Quran is written in Arabic. I don't know Arabic. So, writings like Khalil Gibran, Omar Khayyam, even Shakespeare, you put them all, or from my country, he was a Nobel laureate many years ago, Rabindranath Tagore. He wrote the book Gitanjali, which got him the Nobel Prize. You read the beautiful flow of language, I honestly cannot say that they are worse than the Quran. I'll have to say they're at least equal. So if I am the judge, the test is over. Number four, what language? The Orthodox Muslim accepts only one language of divine communication. In fact, what I have that I read in the Quran in quotes, is an English translation by N.J. Dawood. An Orthodox Muslim will never accept that as the Quran, because the Quran is a Quran only in the Arabic language. So if I must take up this challenge, I must write it in Arabic. How many of us then would it include? I know hundreds and thousands of Muslims who do not know one single sentence of literary Arabic. And therefore, the test has lost its universal character. A test that applies to only a narrow segment of the world's population and is nebulous because it does not tell us what and how to do it, is not a real test. You can challenge me on that, but I believe it cannot be called a real test. When it comes to the Judeo-Christian, and I put these two together because of the nature of the test. The Judaic literature are parts of the law and the prophets and the writings, and the Christian literature is the New Testament, the Gospels and the writings of Paul and the others. Present your case, says the Lord. Let them bring forth and show us what will happen. Declare to us things to come. Show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods. Here is a clear-cut challenge. In other words, this writing is going to make what is known as a predictive prophecy. And a predictive prophecy means this. You can identify when it was made, and you can also independently identify whether it was fulfilled or not. That is called a predictive prophecy. And this writing says that it will make predictive prophecies, and can anybody else equal that? As clear-cut and as precise as what is written here. So I looked at that. For instance, one regarding Babylon. Jeremiah wrote this in about 595 BC, according to historical calculations. At that time, Babylon was the greatest city on earth. It was the most fortified. It had walls that at the top were so broad that 2 chariots could run side by side round the whole city. And sometimes we think this is a high wall. It's about 40 feet, 45 feet. Do you know how high the walls of Babylon went up to? 200 feet. People would wonder whether they should lay siege to Babylon. Do you know why? Because when you lay siege, what you are trying to do is starve them out. Don't let them come in and out. And when their supplies of food is gone inside the city, they just have to come out. And here you are with your armament and your army, and you wipe them off. And that's the meaning of a siege. The people in Babylon would laugh at anybody wanting to do a siege, because the longest sieges of a very rich king would be about 3 years. He would pay his soldiers just to stand around the city. And no king wants to do that. They want to fight and they want to win. So the longest sieges are about 3 years. Babylon would laugh at anybody wanting to lay siege of the city, because inside Babylon, in their storehouses, they had food enough for the entire population for 20 years. You just could not do anything about Babylon, and yet this is what this prophet said: Babylon shall become a heap without an inhabitant, and I will make her springs dry. Do you know how Babylon fell? Babylon was supplied by the river Euphrates, which went under it on one side and came out the other side of the city. That was its water supply. When Cyrus the Mede came, he wanted to be world emperor. And this is one citadel that was standing in his way. If he got it, he would be world emperor. During his forays with his army, crossing the Euphrates not far from Babylon, his horse died in the river. He was very upset. His favorite horse died in the river. So he blamed the river for the death of his horse. And he was so upset that he called his army generals and he said, I want this river dry. Just no more flowing of the river Euphrates. And so his generals and the soldiers manually dug 80 to 300 parallel aqueducts, and then opened the floodgates and pulled the river into those aqueducts. And once the river went into the aqueducts, there was a dry land that went under the wall and across to the other side. And Cyrus said, that's the way I'll enter the city. Babylon fell in one night. I will make her springs dry. That's how it fell. And today, this is Smithsonian. So we saw, like I said, predictive prophecy. We can independently make out when it was said. It was a religious writing that said it. But the fulfillment is not a religious writing. It is something that is a secular writing in today's language now. The Smithsonian, June 2003, page 50 says, few words evoke as many images of ancient decadence, glory, and prophetic doom as does Babylon. Yet the actual place, 50 miles south of Baghdad, is flat, hot, what's the next word? Deserted. You go back to the statement of Jeremiah, it shall become a heap without an inhabitant. 2,500 years have passed, and it is still without an inhabitant. So it's fair for us to say that you and I can vouch that a prophecy was made, and we can go to Baghdad today and see that it has remained fulfilled. 2,500 years. It might take about 50 years for any town to get knocked off. But when something stays that long as a prophecy, I think we should at least give it some credence. How about the next one? Place of birth. Way back about 500 years before the actual birth, there was a writing that this person would be born in a town called Bethlehem. Now there are 2 Bethlehems in the Palestinian area. The family never lived in Bethlehem. The family lived in Nazareth. In a 500-year span time, this family went to Bethlehem because a foreign king said, go back to your ancestral home for just a few weeks so that your census can be taken and then you can go back home to your present home. And so this family went to that place called Bethlehem for just 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and of all the things, she was pregnant up to the 9th month. At that 2-3 weeks, got her baby there, went back to Nazareth, and never went back to Bethlehem. Once again, A prophecy, we know what that was made, and we know that it was fulfilled. Number 3, vinegar. Now what do you give somebody who is thirsty? Water, juice, milk, something like that. Who gives vinegar to drink? But 1,000 years before the event, it was written that somebody would say, I am thirsty, and instead of giving him milk, drink, fruit juice, or water, they would give him vinegar. And that's exactly what happened. He said, I thirst, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, which is vinegar, and put it to his mouth. If I am a prophet today, and I came to you, and everybody in your home has straight blonde hair, and I stand before you and I say, you are going to get a son with black curly hair. And at the age of 4, he will be able to read all of Shakespeare's works. And at the age of 12, he's going to graduate from university with a professional degree. And at the age of 20, he will go to the Olympics and win a gold medal in the butterfly stroke. And at the age of 30, he will win the Nobel Prize in astrophysics. 5 predictions I make. If all 5 come true in your family, I'll guarantee you will chase me to the ends of the earth to find out what my next prediction is going to be. Yes. Whoever heard of this kind of predictions, right? 5. If I made 10, you would say, this guy belongs out of this world. Scholars tell us that in this Judeo-Christian scriptures, there are 600 that have come true. 322 regarding one single individual. 24 of them came to pass in one weekend. I believe that when a challenge is thrown out, and if we are honest in our search, like we said we were going to be, then if the evidence comes to us, we must accept the evidence. That here is a book, here is a writing that did throw out a challenge and met its own challenge in a very impressive way, and there is no other literature on earth that can equal this kind of a performance. There are prophecies in other literature. I'll give you an example. None of them are predictive prophecies. In other words, the prophecies was made here, and we saw its fulfillment right here, and it's independent one from the other. For instance, one from the Hindu literature. Vishnu, their god, the preserver god, comes down to this earth once in every age. The total number is supposed to be 10. There will be 10 incarnations of the god Vishnu. 9 have taken place. Therefore, the 10th has been predicted. And they're predicting his name too. His name is Kalkin. Kalkin is going to come 230,000 years hence. Now, how can I check that out? You see, it's a prophecy, but it's not called predictive prophecy because I can't really check it out. The Islamic literature does have a prophecy. If you read carefully between the lines, there is a prophecy that Mecca would be destroyed by an army. And the writer of that prophecy is Muhammad. He writes the prophecy, and then he takes his army and destroys Mecca. Once again, they are not independent. Whereas this literature, in its predictive prophecy, is independent when it says what it says. And we can check it out. And you can check it out historically. When we go to the founders tomorrow, you will see that it seemed to be that, it's out in front. It did make me uncomfortable because I am a physician. I do read my own literature in the periodicals, the medical periodicals. And if it is too much to one side, it's always suspect. If the numbers are too big, it's always suspect. So when it started this way, I really got a little uncomfortable. And then I stopped my search at a certain point and I said, no, I'm not going to just ask any old question. I'm going to specifically look for factors in which this man doesn't come out in front. And tomorrow we'll look at 3 factors in which he simply doesn't come out in front. So you may think that I'm just pushing it all out in front, but let's look at those factors as well. We'll look at them tomorrow. Right now, let's finish this. One top feature. In the Quran is the language that is supposed to be a top feature. When they listen to it, they feel enveloped in the divine dimension of sound. There was one time when one of them was so mad with Muhammad that he wanted to kill him. He took his sword and walked down the street looking for Muhammad, and he said, he's a heretic, I'm going to kill him today. Somebody directed him back home. When he went home, he saw that the Quran of all things was being read in his own house. He was so angry with those who were reading that he physically abused them and punched them and chased them out. But when they ran, they left the Quran on the floor. It was turned to the 20th chapter. He picked it up and he read, and this is what he said. How fine and noble is the speech, he said wonderingly. And this Muslim was felled, brought to his knees by the beauty of the Quran, which reached through his passionate hatred and prejudice to an inner receptivity that he had not been aware of. He put the sword back in its sheath, walked down the streets to look for Muhammad, and when he found Muhammad, he knelt before him and said, from now I am a Muslim. 1 hour changed his whole lifestyle and life thinking because of the beauty of the Quran. Wow? No? Yes, it is wow. Of course it is wow. And yet in the Quran, the Muhammad is called the Ummi prophet or the unlettered prophet. Muhammad could neither read nor write. He was illiterate. And that is why it is called the Quran. The word Quran means recitation or recitation. What he heard from the angel Gabriel, he would come and recite. And there were people who would quickly try to memorize what he's saying or write it down somewhere, and then they gathered it up into a Quran. And that is why the Quran is called Quran, which means a recitation or a recitation, because he was unlettered. The language of the Quran then is amazing, exquisitely beautiful, and possibly supernatural. Hinduism, its deep philosophy, is definitely one of the top features. Hindu sages have given to mankind one of the most sophisticated systems of philosophy ever devised. That's from the National Geographic. It contains a blend of religion, ethics, civil codes, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and other natural sciences. When you go into them, it's really impressive, the way they write up their things. Of course, there are discrepancies and contradictions like any other writing, but basically a very deep philosophy. So, Hindu philosophy is amazing, deep, and brilliant. Buddhism, 3 features. It's vast, detailed, mysterious. The Pali, which is a language, the original language, the first language in which it was written, contains 45 volumes. The Chinese, 100 volumes of 1,000 printed pages. The Tibetan, 325 volumes. The Pali, which is Indian, Chinese, Tibetan. Put them together, it comes to 470,000 pages. Less than half of it has been translated today from the original Pali and Sanskrit. So it's huge. It's also very, very detailed. For instance, if you want to identify a Buddha, here's how you do it. The Lord's body had 32 marks of a Superman and was adorned with the 80 subsidiary characteristics. He was endowed with the 18 special dharmas of a Buddha, mighty with the 10 powers of a Tathagata, and in possession of the 4 grounds of self-confidence. Extremely precise, despite its vastness. And the way they lived, the monks were subject to 250 rules in the monasteries. They are known as Pratimoksha rules. They were supposed to say a prayer, and this is a common prayer, and say all of it. And here's it, how it goes. May I be freed at all times from the 4 states of woe, the 3 scourges, the 8 wrong circumstances, the 5 enemies, the 4 deficiencies, the 5 misfortunes, and quickly attain the path. Now you can see immediately how detailed they want to be. And you just can't say 4 states of woe. You have to state the states of woe and the rest. Further, the bulk of this literature is couched in a deliberately mysterious language which would convey nothing to the average reader. In other words, you must get into the thinking and thought of Buddha himself and some of the others who are bodhisattvas before you can understand what is written there. For instance, the realization that undifferentiated emptiness is the sole absolute truth. How many of you understood that? See, it's difficult to understand. Nirvana is therefore that mental state in which one realizes that all things are really non-existent. It is not easy. It is couched in language that the ordinary reader will have a difficult time. So it is vast, it is detailed, precise, and very mysterious. Buddhism then is amazing, awesome, and mysterious, possibly supernatural. Judeo-Christian, again I put these two together for the way in which this feature comes out. It's a complex book, 66 individual books, written over 1400 years. The spectrum is really vast. Kings, military generals, peasants, philosophers, fishermen, tax collectors, and the rest. Now what I'm going to show is a feature, and it is called cross-referencing or attesting. This is not found in any other ancient writing. For instance, there is attestation between authors of the Old Testament. For example, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of the years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah. Daniel is saying this: I got my information from a certain source, and that same source had spoken to Jeremiah earlier. That's his attestation. You get it between authors of New Testament too. Peter is attesting Paul. And he says, according to the wisdom that was given Paul. In other words, wherever I got my wisdom from, Paul also got his wisdom from. And between the authors of the New and the Old Testament, for instance, this one down here, all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the Lord through the prophet Isaiah. This is Matthew. Matthew is saying, I've got my information that I'm writing down from a certain source, and that source had spoken to Isaiah 600 years earlier. This cross-attestation is absolutely unique. There is no other literature on earth that has this kind of cross-attestation. So, attesting. And so, we are just accepting what the writings are telling us. We are not saying it's true or false. Just put it out there. If that's the case, and we've accepted the other features as really valid, then let's accept this also and say that the Lord was a source throughout the writing of the Bible. Therefore, this source lived for at least 1400 to 1500 years. And that is humanly impossible. Because the Guinness Book of World Records says the most that a man can live is 120 years today. So if there is a source that lived all that while and supervised the writing, then the feature becomes humanly impossible. Now, all of the features are very impressive. We must never think that one supersedes the other. And in this one, I think all of them come out so high that I stand in awe of them. Let's close for this evening and come back at 7 o'clock or before 7 o'clock tomorrow. We will go through what I said. Now the founders, the flesh and blood founders, do they lead? They go back? We will look at them tomorrow. Please come back.